Hello, this is Ben Payton, and you're listening to the Build Podcast.
Thanks to Ben Payton, who we walked the beat with in our last podcast, taking a look at the noughties. This time we're heading back to 1989 with the man from Special Branch. He's an acclaimed actor, a best-selling author, and he's got some fantastic memories from starring in 2 series of The Bill. I'm joined now from Canada by Chris Humphreys. Chris, welcome to the Bill Podcast.
Oh, it's delightful to be here, Oliver.
Well, I'm spoilt for choice as to where to begin. They say the world's a stage, and you've graced many a stage all over the world. You've starred in feature films, hundreds of television credits, but perhaps we can start by talking about the fact that you are a best-selling author.
Well, that's right, yes. I'd always written something, and I'd always wanted to be a writer and held off doing it for all the reasons one does, the fear factor and, I can't really ever achieve that. But I just had this cracking idea for a novel, and I thought, well, you just blow it. I'm going to dive in and do it. So I did. I had a really good idea. I wrote a novel about the man who killed Anne Boleyn. The French Executioner was the eventual title. It turned into this absolute sort of rollicking, crazy, madcap chase with dark villains and wonderful, bright heroes and a lot of magic. And it was a romp, really. And I didn't think anyone but my mother and my wife would ever read it. But in fact, an agent took me on, and then Orion, the publisher, took me on for a 2-book deal, which meant I had to write them another one. And suddenly there I was, launched as an author, and haven't looked back, really. I mean, I've dovetailed it with I've kept up the acting, sometimes, but it was nice to, in a way, have that monkey off my back. I didn't need so much to be an actor. I didn't need to subject myself to the less exciting side of being an actor. The acting is always great. It's the business of acting can be a problem sometimes. And so to have the outlet of being able to make up my own stories all the time was fantastic.
How did it feel when you held the finished article in your hands for the first time? That must have been a special moment.
It was. And, I have to say, Oliver, it never actually really goes away, that moment when you hold the result of perhaps a year or more of work in your hand and all those hours sat at your desk by yourself making stuff up and, talking to your imaginary friends. But the first time, yes, you think, well, maybe this is why I'm here. Maybe that's, I've justified my place on the planet in this, at least, if I never do anything else,
Well, you've managed to combine acting and writing. You've had an extraordinary career doing both. Or has there ever been a moment where one has clashed with the other and you've ended up not being able to do something?
Yes, there have been moments when I've chosen to write rather than act, partly because writing is actually paying my living much more these days, and there are things like contracts and deadlines. So sometimes I can't do an acting gig that I might otherwise want to do. I definitely go away less in theatre now. I used to love going away and doing theatre work. I still do it sometimes. But I try to stick much closer to home because home is where I write my books. For many years when I was first writing, I defined myself as an actor who wrote. And now I think I define myself as a writer who acts. I shall probably be defined in the end by perhaps my writing over my acting, but who knows? Maybe I'll have a late flurry and become, the old codger actor who suddenly lands those great roles. I don't know.
I mean, obviously, acting was very much in the genes within your families. I mean, when were you first aware about the acting dynasty in the Humphreys family?
I suppose I was always aware of it. We lived in Hollywood, so my early memories are Los Angeles and my dad trying to make it as an actor there. I was only there for 5 years. I came to England when I was just before I was 7 years old. But yes, it was always there. My dad was quite an actor's actor. He had the amazing whiskey and cigarette voice and, and he talked about his legacy from his actually far more successful father in the end, my grandfather, Cecil Humphreys, who was a Broadway actor. I mean, a British actor, but went out to Broadway in 36 and never came back. Did a lot of quite big Hollywood movies as well, like Wuthering Heights with Laurence Olivier and The Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power. So I was aware of that. And then on my mother's side as well, her parents were both actors in Norway. And my mother always said that I took after her father, both in looks and a certain wildness of behavior. The imaginative side of me was making up stories from an early age. I think that's what, I mean, even though the acting legacy is so strong, I think the storytelling legacy of my background has been the major driver for me. My dad wrote. My Norwegian grandfather was probably better known as a writer than an actor. So the writing side of it was always there as well. But essentially, I suppose if I had to pick one word for my gravestone, I don't know why I'm talking about gravestones.
No.
I'm not feeling particularly peaky at the moment, but
I'm good. I'm glad to hear it.
but would be storyteller, because I'd love to tell stories in any form. I directed a play last year, and that's a form of storytelling.
How did your own career begin? Did you study acting at drama school? Was that the conventional route? Or?
Yes, well, it was slightly unconventional in that I wasn't going to be an actor. I was bucking the genetic inheritance and the family trend, because my mother, who wasn't an actor, but was obviously married to one and had seen him suffer, really. My dad wasn't terribly successful, to be honest. And also she grew up with parents who were actors, and that led to a lot of moving and uncertainty and all that stuff. So she really didn't want either of her children to be. And my elder brother, went off into electronics and was the white sheep of the family. I was heading to university to read, well, initially law, because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then, of course, I got cast in the lead in the school play. And then all the blood inheritance kicked in. It was Edward Albee's The Zoo Story. It's an amazing one-act play. And that was it. I was hooked. So university went on the back burner, and I decided to go to drama school. So I took a year off first and somehow survived it, because I spent that year as a motorcycle messenger in London, which was madness, but of course has paid dividends now, because I write so much about London now, historical London, that I know it so well. But then I went to the Guildhall School of Music and Drama for 3 years.
A lot of actors who join the bill as a regular, it's their first big breakthrough part, whereas you're actually joining with after like a decade in television already under your belt, and a very successful hit with AD, Anno Domini.
Yes, that was the one that took me away to Hollywood for the best part of 3 years, which is a place I had always wanted to return to, as having loved it as a child. Sunny California was where I was drawn to. I'd sort of gone back into English regional theatre, and I was down at Exeter doing Barefoot in the Park at the Northcott when I got the call to go up and audition for a smallish ensemble role, actually. They were putting an ensemble together for this biblical Roman epic shooting in Tunisia. And I just think I was just on fire as an actor at the time. I was loving being back on stage. When I met the director, he just took one look at me and said, "Yeah, I'm going to screen test you for Caleb." And I thought, Caleb, he mentioned him. He's the Jewish gladiator. I thought, I'm pretty Norwegian, Northern European, and I thought, well, okay, humor the guy, took the script, we did a screen test, and they cast me. So I went to Tunisia for 10 months for someone who loved history like I did. It was amazing. And also one of the very few skills I do possess is a sort of ability with weaponry. I essentially became an actor so I could leap around with bladed weaponry. So casting me as a gladiator was great, and I got to, fight in a coliseum down there, and, I was a net and trident man. But it was a great part as well. It wasn't just all physical. I aged from 18 to 60 in it. It was a big turnaround for me. It took me off to Hollywood, which in the end wasn't what I wanted. I lived there for a bit, but in the end, I decided I didn't want a career in American television. So I came back to England in '86.
And I saw your Dempsey and Makepeace the other day, having a rather fun scene downstairs with Dempsey and Makepeace sussing out your drug den.
Oh, God, that's right. I was a sort of coke dealer or something
Yes,
weird.
Right.
Yeah, that was strange. The only thing I remember about that performance was that I wore a diamond earring. I used to occasionally basically root a performance in a prop, which I'm very big on props, or a piece of jewelry or a mustache. And sometimes there's a role that just sort of, that's it. You're basically done. When I did Coronation Street, which was a terrific experience, the script I got was just amazing. And I played this sort of wide boy Londoner called Clive Parnell, all fake tan and bling. And it was written in the script that I would have a Vicks inhaler and use it like a sort of baton to conduct my scene in the Rover's Return. for me, as a kind of proppy actor, that was an absolute bloody gift.
Well, you have a claim to fame. You are the first regular actor from the Bill after finishing the series to join Coronation Street.
Is that right? Oh, that's quite the claim.
Absolutely. Many have done it since, but yeah, you were the first.
I think one of the reasons is that you couldn't get more diverse characters than Richard Turnham and Clive Parnell, with the sort of more bottled up, middle-class English guy that Turnham was to the sort of wide boy Londoner that Parnell was. Turnham was a role that I suppose was a little closer to who I am in terms of background and everything. Whereas, like a lot of actors, so many of us are really all character actors. That's what we love. We love to play the diverse characters. And even though we might sort of slip into those sort of the leading man roles and have that sort of more straightforward look sometimes, it's not that I haven't done that and haven't enjoyed doing that. But for me, the buzz is always to take on something more away from me. And so, to play within the space of 5 years, a Jewish gladiator, a middle-class English policeman, and a Cockney wide boy was marvelous. I tried to bring all these different things to Turnham because he could have just been too much of a straight arrow, I think. I remember when I joined, being the sort of the researcher that I am, and also someone who, this particularly plays into my writing later on, is very interested in where a character comes from. So how do you begin? So I remember writing a sort of mini essay about Turnham, filling in all the blanks that weren't on the page of the scripts I was given. Not the writers were superb, but they didn't do a lot of background. And so I wrote this whole backstory for him and then gave it to the producers, and they said, we're going to actually use some of this. I wrote about his parents, so the idea of service being very much part of his family. I made him a hockey blue at Cambridge or something. But also, I think what was intriguing for me was, I knew my job. I'd been hired to wind up the Cockneys. That was essentially it. Turnham's there. I was told, first day, you're a seagull, mate. Not in the script, but I think one of the police advisors said, you're a seagull. And I said, really? What's a seagull? I'm going to be slightly rude here, Oliver, and I'm sure you're okay with this. But he said, well, seagulls, they come into the, position like this. They fly high above the other coppers and shit on them as they go past. There was no way I was going to be there long. I was serving my time, but I was a Cambridge University graduate. They were going to have me off to special branch as quickly as possible. So, there I was, and they created this lovely antipathy between me and Quinnen, played by the wonderful Andrew Paul. And so, he had the goods on me because, I'd been a bit of a rogue at the previous station, and got involved with a superior's wife, apparently. So there was all this other stuff to Turnham. I do remember, just asking for various things as an actor. Like we had to do this scene where we all sat around, waiting for something. And I said, well, I want to read a newspaper. They said, oh, yeah, we'll bring in the Telegraph or something. I said, no, Turnham is a Guardian reader. And they looked at me and went, yeah, all right. So there I am sitting in one corner, probably the only copper at Sunhill who ever read The Guardian.
You were an established actor by then, so was this a straight offer of a regular role in the Bill?
Well, actually, it's quite a fun story because it's a real actor's and a real agent's story. This actually, just to briefly fill in, I'd come back from America. I'd gone off on a 6-month tour playing Jack Absolute in The Rivals, who I later ended up writing novels about. Though personally, I wasn't having such a good time. My marriage was ending. I was a bit lost at that point. I'd had the big Hollywood thing. I'd married, and I was now sort of feeling I was failing this major adult test, as it was, having had a pretty steady, thriving career. I was now in my early 30s and wondering, okay, what next? I've done Hollywood. I've done some fairly big British TV, and I've played a lot of theatre, but, is this it? And so I was actually going through a bit of a sort of, I'm not even sure maybe I should just go traveling for a couple of years or something, just get my head together. And I was in a bit of that state when I switched agents, and I joined this wonderful British agent who, if there are actors out there, they'll go, oh yeah, Barry Brown. And now Barry Brown was really, he was one of those old lovey agents, just been around for years, liked to take his 3-hour lunches, So I joined Barry. And about a week later, Barry was visiting a friend of his in hospital. he might have been a client even. The guy's wife was Paddy O'Connell, who was the casting director on the bill. And so they're standing around her husband's, hospital bed. And, he's brought the flowers and the grapes and whatever, and they're chatting away. And of course, Barry's an agent. So he immediately turns to the wife and says, so, who are you casting on the bill at the moment? And she says, well, look, I'm casting a Cambridge University graduate, but I know your list and you don't have anyone of that who fits that description. And Barry looked at her and said, Chris Humphreys. And she said, you don't have Chris Humphreys. He said, I do as of last week. She said, oh, that is actually a very good idea. Send him in. And I always had that vision of like that scene in the movie Airplane where the person's sort of flatlining while everyone completely, I just had imagined the poor client lying on the bed, with this flatline going on or gasping for oxygen as Barry does a deal. So anyway, they pulled me in for an interview and they cast me straight away. And they needed me straight away as well because they had my very first script was actually an undercover. And they wanted someone to come in and pretend to be a contract hitman, actually.
That's right. It's a cracking episode called Make My Day. I think it's your second line is the only people that could have given you references are 6 feet under.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a great line. I'm gonna have to watch all this again. This is great.
And at the end of the episode, you go back having done this fantastic undercover job, and Burnside says to Cryer, bright lad you've got there, Bob, a lot of bottle. And Cryer says, yeah, well, put your uniform back on, son. I'll find something useful for you to do. And the music kicks in as you walk off to the locker,
Oh, did I get the drums on that episode?
You get the drums on your first episode, and indeed, full circle, you get the drums on your last episode as well, which I thought was a nice touch.
I only remember the last one. I didn't remember that I got them on the first one because, we were all, that was our one major rivalry. Who would get the boom, boom, boom as we walked off, That was, that's great. And it's funny enough, I'll tell you something other quick about that episode. Chris Ellison, who, I think is a fantastic actor and a great guy and really funny man. There was a line he said, which I still say to this day from that episode. Whenever I say, if someone says to me, makes sense, I always add what Ellison said in that. His line to me was, makes sense, makes a lot of sense. And that's what I say. I still say that to this day. I can't say makes sense without saying makes a lot of sense.
Your second episode, you go on the beat with Eric Richard.
Oh, this was a really good one.
Oh, yeah. You run into a house and a Cryer gets knocked down the stairs, and then you go in like Rocky Balboa and knock the living daylights out of this guy.
That was fantastic. That was what I considered my real intro, partly because I got to work with Eric, who is an absolute gem. I had a beer with him last year. I hadn't seen him in 15 years, and we had a beer together, and I always had a great chat with Eric, because Eric is one of those guys. He's a real actor's actor. He has, he loves the craft. We would talk theatre all the time. But in terms of character, that was fascinating because it was the first chance to show what Turnham also had, which he had a slight sort of psychopathic streak in him, He liked to get stuck in. That's the day he really blows it. And of course, Cryer gets beaten up because of Turnham's over-exuberance and desire to have a go. But it was the funniest story about that episode was that the original script came down and it had me whipping out my truncheon and setting to, right? So I was quite looking forward to that, being a bit of a weapons guy. And then the police advisor came up to me. We had these retired cops on the staff, basically, who would come and vet all the scripts for authenticity, which was grand, because it was really authentic. That's why the police loved the show. Anyway, this retired DS came up to me and said, Chris, you're not going to be able to use the truncheon. I went, oh, no, really? I was really looking forward to that. He said, no, police really don't hit people with truncheons. And I said, I thought they did. He said, no, not if at all possible, because there's all this paperwork you have to fill out afterwards. I went, what? He said, you hit someone with a truncheon, it's days filling out paperwork. I said, oh. I said, so what do you hit them with? He said, a torch, one of those big rubber torches. You hit them with that. I went, what? He said, yeah, hit him with a rubber torch, no paperwork. I know, it cracked me up. It absolutely cracked me up. I mean, it's sinister as well, of course, but it absolutely cracked me up. And of course, in the end, I think I just did it with my fists. But
you give a fantastic right hook. It knocks the guy flying.
I actually kept my truncheon. Well, thank God the show's closed now because they'd have me now because I actually just thought I'm taking my truncheon. I took my epaulets as well. And my truncheon, I loved my truncheon because it had a little pink pig on the end of it, which I thought was suitable irony and all that. I liked that idea. One time I was sat there in a police car waiting to drive around a corner. I had the radio telling me, for action, I was going to drive around the corner. This woman pulls up beside me. This is in Hammersmith. And she said, "Is it all right if I park there?" And I looked at her and I went, "All right with me, love." And I drove off. I always felt very bad about that because she probably got a ticket. Whenever you have catering set up on the bill, we drew real policemen like flies to honeypots, right? Police love a free meal. They'll pretend they're doing security, but they're not doing that. We didn't have security in those days. We just fetched up, right, which was always interesting. There we were on location, and these two traffic cops show up, and we have lunch with them. It always great to talk to them. You get some good information. And this one cop says to me, "So tell me why you never do stories about traffic policemen." And I went, "Oh, I don't know." He said, "Because we're very interesting, I said, "Well, I'm sure you are." And he told lots of stories, and I told, "Well, they are interesting, I'll definitely mention it to the script department." He said, "Another thing, you guys, it's annoying, because we all graduate from Hendon College, like you would have done, but none of you wear the tie pin." And I go, "Really? Well, that is interesting. I'll definitely mention that to wardrobe. I'll make sure they get me one, because the sort of thing, Turnham would have worn." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, mate, have mine." And he took it off his tie and gave it to me. So I I didn't put it straight on the tie then because of continuity, but I wore it in every subsequent episode.
Oh, wonderful.
When the show finished, I thought, well, that's mine, not theirs. And I took it, and I now have it. I have a fedora, which I wear quite often, and I have it in the hat band.
Oh, fantastic. In Series 6, your part really does get a lot bigger, and you're in a lot more episodes. You start being on the beat a lot more. In an episode called Carry Your Bags, Sir. You chase a suspect along the canal, and he takes to swipe at you with a spanner. You end up falling in it.
Yeah, I mean, that was hysterical. They came to me and they said, "Right, we would like to drop you in the canal." And I said, "No, thank you very much." So I'd probably use something slightly older and more Anglo-Saxon. And they said, no, it's safe. We've done all the tests. Here's the chemical report. There's no, because, I was thinking of rats and Weil's disease and all that horrible stuff. Yeah. And they said, "No, look, you'll be in a wetsuit. It'll be fine. There's no sign of rat infestation in the part of the canal we're doing it, And I'm always game for a laugh. So I said, "Yeah, all right then." We did the sequence, and I got totally into it, of course. And I suppose what I was surprised at, as many people might be surprised, though perhaps I should have known this, canals are so shallow, right? They're only 5 foot deep. You think, oh, it must be like a river, but it's not at all. It's just for barges. So there I was. So I fall in. And then once I'm in, I think, well, look, let's get some shots. And so I say, "Look, bring me a bottle of Perrier." And they went, "What?" It seemed a bit odd for an actor to be demanding Perrier. I said, "No, give me some of that Perrier." So I then took a mouthful of Perrier, ducked under the water again, got up and spat out the water. And which they loved, of course. But the funny thing was that later that very night, it was a summer, and I'd spotted this lovely pub opposite where the shoot was, with a lovely canal side garden. And I thought, I'll just go there. So I went with a couple of people from the bill on the production side, actually. And we went and we were having a lovely pint sitting in the back. And I said, "Yeah, this is where I did the shot, And as I look across, this huge bloody rat comes lolloping out right where I jumped in and ran off. And I thought, oh, my God, I've got Weil's disease.
Oh, no.
Yes. Yeah, that very day.
No. You didn't catch that suspect, but in the very next episode, you're back. It's an episode called Officers and Gentlemen. You catch a man who's using a stolen credit card in a music shop, and you have a chase up some steps, but you get him.
Oh, yes, that's right. I don't think the director let me say, "All right, my son, you're nicked," which I wanted to do, but of course Turnham wouldn't really have said that, so she was quite wise to restrain me.
Yeah, there's a good scene it's in an episode called Chinese Whispers, and you've just had a nice cup of tea with Peter Ellis as Brownlow, not something any of the other regular uniform officers would have enjoyed. And then you're down in the locker, and Quinnan says, "Oh, temptation shouldn't be in the way this time. I hear his wife is a bit of an old dog." Yeah, you slam his locker shut and block him being able to leave. And then Graham Cole walks in, stops you from probably doing him some serious damage. Oh, yeah, I remember that very clearly. And, every time you mention the name of an actor, I go, oh, yeah, because they were such terrific actors, everyone.
to work with. The ensemble work in that show, and because it was a complete team, and anytime you got to act with any of them, you had to bring your best game, because everyone was really good, but also, we were all about the moment, all about working together. It was, the scripts were excellent, the crew were wonderful, the camera work was amazing, I thought, especially as we had to shoot it so fast. These were very quickly shot. If you as an actor asked for another take, they might give you one more. They probably wouldn't give you two, So you had to really bring your game to the moment. Graham was a great guy. Graham and I had this, I can't remember what episode it was, but I remember he and I chatting about it. And he and I were the two big men. We were the two tallest guys among the bobbies. And so we had we thought we played a moment of, are you and I going to go? Are we going now? And we both backed off, but we discussed it beforehand. And so there is that moment when Graham, and, Graham's such a lovely man, we talked to each other about it, and we'd say, what can we bring to this moment, which I think it was definitely one of the strengths of the bill.
Yeah, that's a lovely episode. It's called Kidding. I'm in an episode called Workers in Uniform. Andrew Paul has borrowed your patrol car and then scratched it. Then you're up in front of the late, great Colin Terence, calling you a sloppy officer.
I love Colin. I was devastated when I heard the news about Colin. Colin, when he joined a few months after me, and people were inevitably and invariably lovely when a new actor, but a new regular joining, it's a fairly nerve-wracking. You're joining one of the best established shows in the country, very high visibility. And I remember Colin being really sweet, because I had quite a few scenes with him in that episode that he joined. And he came up to me at the end of the day and he said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, just thank you for kind of looking after me out there." And I went, "Mate, we've all been here. Welcome aboard, A lovely, lovely man, terrific actor."
You're dragging a gentleman into custody, and he says, "In my country, I'm an entertainer, an artist." And then you respond and say, "Well, in my country, you're a drunk."
Yeah, Turnham had a bit of a wit to him. That was, and they wrote for that. That was the other great thing about the writers. They would pick up on something you did, and they would think, "Oh, okay, he can do that stuff." So I think, when you point out that maybe I got some more of the wry humor, I suppose that's what the writers picked up on.
You go into a pub with Sita Indrani.
Sita. I was going to ask you about her. Sita was lovely, and she and I got on very well.
You take on a monster of a man called Mad Mike. He's played by Terry Richards, and he kicks you into a table of drinks. And it looks like you did that yourself. It looks like it's you.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that was me. I mean, we had great stunt guys, obviously, and they wouldn't risk us on anything too serious. But something like that, I'd done a lot of stage fighting, and I could definitely get away with that. So I'm sure I did do that. And Terry Richards, yes, I remember him. He was enormous. Yeah. But I'm 6'2", and I'm not used to standing in a bar looking up at people. It was quite an odd feeling.
The major episode for you is a cracking episode called Citadel.
Oh, yeah.
You're being investigated by MI11. Because this investigation is going on, you've been given a rather tedious task of guarding a hole with a lovely old actor called Michael Bilton.
Oh, he was great. Oh, he had a blast. He keeps going. And I do remember one of my lines. I had to take this deep sigh and look at him and go, "Not busy yourself today, sir?"
That's exactly right.
And that was a great, because that was basically, it wasn't my final episode, was it? But it was my penultimate episode, because this is the one where I'm being interviewed. Christopher Godwin, another excellent actor, and he came in to interview me about, am I fit to go to Special Branch, given that I've donated money to the IRA, it seemed, and also had an affair with the former chief superintendent's wife at the previous station, so which is what Quinnen had been alluding to all the time. So I do remember that episode. That was a lovely one to when I knew my time was up, obviously, on the bill, but it was, as you say, a lot of actors just didn't get the exit story, and to know that they were doing that for me was definitely a privilege. To be honest, I was originally told I was going to be on it for 3 months. So the fact that I got close to a year out of it was great. But they just, they said, we try to reflect, what actually happens in a police station, and Turnham wouldn't stay around. He's off. He's got to go off to a Special Branch. So he's a high flyer. There's that moment of, but then But then afterwards, my travel plans had been interrupted. I was going to go off traveling, remember? So suddenly, I could go traveling with a healthy bank account behind me. So it was great.
And quite a compliment, isn't it, to go to Special Branch? That's quite a cool thing for a character, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I kept waiting for the spin-off series, Yeah. It would have just been called Turnham. And, I'd have been the big cop star of Britain now, rather than lying on a bed in Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. So.
And you do get mentioned after you leave. I don't know if you ever knew this, but, I mean, some characters go and they never get mentioned again. But Reg Hollis talks about whatever happened to Turnham in a scene in Mark Powley's last ever episode, actually.
Oh, well, that's good. That's nice to know. No, I didn't know that. Well, thanks for telling me that. I also, I did visit, because all my stuff was done at Barlby Road, off Ladbroke Road.
Yeah.
And then they moved to Merton. And I went down and visited, just to have a beer with some of the guys after the move, and went into the studio, and it was so, and the complex there is so different from the rather ramshackle Barlby Road, which we loved. Actors actually had their own dressing rooms or shared with one other guy, whereas when I did it, it was more like a rugby team. You had the blokes' dressing room and you had the girls' dressing room, and that was it. When I went to Merton, I walked into the lobby, and there was about 10 large framed black and white photographs, and I was in one of them. So that was that was nice. Yeah.
You then went more or less straight into Coronation Street. Presumably your life changed in terms of a recognition for the British public. I'm guessing you got recognised from being in the bill.
Yes, it's interesting. I've got a wanderer's heart, right? I've always been a wanderer. This comes from my family moving around so much, I suppose, and I find it hard to stay put. At that time, I was really sort of seeking to go other places, and so after Corrie, I thought I'll just go and visit Vancouver for a summer. Hang out on the beaches and stuff. And then ended up getting cast in A Midsummer Night's Dream in a Shakespeare festival and stayed 5 years before I went back to England. So I think my problem sometimes as an actor has been that I haven't recognized when there might be a bit of wind in my sails and I should probably stay put. And I don't regret any of this, by the way, because all the choices have led to me, being a writer and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of an acting career, yes, I think my recognizability factor had gone up after the bill, and maybe was aided by Coronation Street. And that if I'd hung around, who knows? I mean, I'm not a great one for going what if, because as I say, I'm pretty happy now. But having had those two sort of quite big successes, I then buggered off to Canada for 5.5 years. I came back partly because I went, hang on, I had a whole life in England and I'd met my wife and we decided to move back to England. One of the reasons being I'd never appeared on a West End stage as my father and my grandfather had done, and I really wanted to do that. And within 6 months I was in a big musical at the Victoria Palace called Always. So I came back and re-energized my career that way. But sometimes I think, you just sort of, I don't necessarily pick the best times to leave. I haven't been strategic sometimes in my thinking about a career. But you never know. I mean, acting's such a up and down business. People might have gone, we've had enough of him.
Well, you've had one of the most interesting acting careers since the bill. I've got a few favourites here, if you don't mind humouring me with some of my favourites of your roles.
Not at all.
Well, the first, and I grew up with this, you voiced a character in The Hurricane.
I voiced several characters in The Hurricanes. I did. The cartoon, the soccer team. Yeah, that was great. That was in Vancouver. Helmut von Beethoven's a star striker for the team, yeah.
In terms of recognisable cartoons here, I mean, The Hurricanes, Action Man, Inspector Gadget. I mean, these are like really iconic cartoons.
Yeah, well, actually, my most famous, I don't know if this was as big in the UK as it was in North America, but this is what actually makes people go, ooh. I was the original voice of Salem the Cat in Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
No.
I was.
No way, I didn't know this. This is amazing.
Yeah, I know. I was the original Salem in the pilot episode, which they shot in Vancouver. I then went in post and recorded the voice in a studio in Vancouver while the director was down in LA on a telephone patch. It was always quite fun to do things like that. But then they relocated to Los Angeles, and so they wanted an actor down there to do it. So people of a certain age who grew up with that series go, you were Salem? Oh, my God.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's an exclusive. I didn't know about that. Here we go. Well, I must ask about this because I'm rather excited to be talking to the man who taught Sean Connery's character in Highlander how to be a swordsman.
Well, yes. I mean, alas, I never got to act with Mr. Connery, but yes, I am an immortal. It's true. Though I always found it a bit annoying that I'm a dead immortal. I mean, I'm not sure how that works even. But yes, I was Graham Ashe, the original teacher of, Duncan MacLeod. I taught him, and then he mentions to me that, oh, of course, you taught Ramirez. So, again, one of those roles that, people go, ooh, because you're connected to a big legacy there. That's one of those shows that is legendary and people still watching it like crazy. And,
It must be wonderful to, presumably being a swordsman is an almighty bonus. I mean, being able to use and wield a sword, but also do it safely, that you don't harm your fellow actors.
Unless you really don't like them. I was a fencer at school. I always loved swords, and that was my main sport when I was at school. I was a saber champion and all that sort of stuff. And then when I went to drama school, I did a lot of stage fighting, and then have managed to parlay that. I don't tap dance, and I'm not a great singer, so it is my only skill really. And I've managed to deploy it on a number of occasions. I mean, even in Canada, I even became a fight choreographer for some time. So yes, it is useful, and it has served me quite well in terms of those sort of roles. I mean, The Gladiator, that was one of them. Highlander, I was cast at least partly because of my sword skills, and then Zorro as well. I play. Funny enough, that's become quite a big thing. I was contacted by the Zorro fan group, and I'm apparently one of the 3 best villains they ever had on that. And I was only on one episode. Sir Miles Thackeray, the finest swordsman in Europe, and a total cad, of course. I use it a lot in my writing. I mean, my books are often what would be termed swashbucklers. I wrote a novel called Shakespeare's Rebel, which combined my 2 greatest passions in a way, which are Hamlet and swords. And I wrote a novel about William Shakespeare's fight choreographer at the time that Shakespeare was writing Hamlet. And he's also his oldest friend, and he's an actor, and he's a drunk. And it's an examination of that world and the world of the globe, the world of theatre. So my sword fights, any sort of fights I have in my books, tend to be pretty well choreographed and usually quite interesting, I think, without being over technical. But you don't want to do over technical stuff as a writer, because people just go, well, I have no idea what you're talking about. So the whole weaponry and the whole fighting thing has been a component of my life, I suppose, and has been useful both as an actor and a writer.
Do you think the Chris Humphreys at the start of your acting career must be 40 years, in the business?
Oh my God, yes, you're right. It's next year, it's 40 years. Yeah.
Yeah. When you look at what you've done, do you think you 40 years ago would be happy with what you've achieved so far?
Oh, yeah, probably. Actors are never entirely happy. If I sit back and look at it, and as you've just described it, of course, I've had amazing times. I've traveled the world. I've played some great parts. I got to play Hamlet, for God's sake, on stage, which was always the dream. No, I mean, absolutely. If I was looking ahead from the business back then, I'm sure I'd have been pretty pleased. There's gaps. I got sucked into, and I didn't mind this at all because I've had some great adventures on it, but I did get sucked into the whole TV world quite early on. And I think if I could go back, I might try to balance it out a bit more with a little more theatre. I've done quite a lot of theatre, but I think I set out to be a sort of classical actor, and I've done less. I've done maybe 5 Shakespeares over my life, and so maybe there would have been a bit of a balance back that way. But really, to be honest, I cannot complain. I mean, look what I've had the most amazing career. I've had the privilege to work with some of the best actors on the planet, and some of the unsung ones as well. To be able to do scenes with those actors on the bill, that crack ensemble. It was a buzz every day. No, I think I'd probably look forward and go, well, if that's it, that's it. But, I'm still an actor. I'm still keen. I love my writing, and I've got lots of exciting projects ahead in that line. My 16th novel will be coming out next year, and I've got lots of other plans and ambitions in that line. But I've got a few roles in me yet. And, I as an actor, and until they're actually shoveling dirt in your face, you've still got another role in you. So I'm looking forward to all that too.
What is your message to fans of The Bill who are listening to this? And I'm a fan who's pretty much discovered your work on the series 28 years later, and
wow.
What does it mean to you? And would you have any idea that, when you were filming it nearly 30 years ago, that there'd be some West Country lad interviewing you about it over Skype and you'd be in Canada?
No, I would not have had that idea at the time at all. No. It's interesting. I mean, most actors don't spend a lot of time worrying about legacy. They're too concerned about the next gig, and it's always interesting as well that you finish a job and you move on and you think, I remember the first job I had, I thought, well, I'm going to stay friends with these people forever. And of course I've hardly seen any of them ever since. And that's always the case. We are gypsies and we wander all the time. And so you meet up with this great group of people and you work very intensely with them and you think, I'll love them forever. And you do love them forever. You just maybe never see them again. So at the time, you don't think that. You don't think, yes, they'll be remembering Richard Turnham in 30 years' time, because you think, no, I'm just, I've moved on. It's lovely to know. It's lovely to know that people are still out there enjoying your work. Of course, you do hope, when you lay anything down on film, that it will stand the test of time. I think The Bill does. I think it's not one of those shows that's going to date particularly. If you hadn't got in touch with me, I wouldn't have thought about it, but now you have, and I've been able to talk to you about all this. It's brought back some lovely memories of some excellent times, and also some, a bit of pride as well. I'm very proud to have been PC Turnham in a great show. It's way up there on my list of credits as one of those things I will look back on and go, yep, did that.
Well, I'm sure everyone listening to this will be as grateful as I am that you've given your time for free. And if there is there a charity you support, but if listeners want to donate a couple of quid to?
I think one of the things that I am concerned about, that everyone is concerned about, of course, is the environment these days. And so if they have a good local environmental charity that's perhaps working locally to preserve some of the wonderful countryside around. Locally is great, but if you can't find one locally, then Greenpeace are a fantastic organization too.
I'm glad you feel proud of your time on The Bill. You certainly wore the uniform with pride. You looked the part. You gave a fantastic performance. And I'm really chuffed to have been talking to you and celebrating your life and career so far. I'm sure there's plenty of gold dust. And I'm going to be enjoying reading the rest of The French Executioner and then dipping into the rest of your novels. And I'm so grateful. So on behalf of everyone listening, Chris Humphreys, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Oliver. It's been very, very good fun.
My huge thanks to Chris Humphreys for giving his time and sharing his brilliant memories of The Bill. I thoroughly enjoyed researching Chris's career. To be honest, I still feel like I've only scratched the surface. He's a really fascinating man, and I thoroughly enjoyed his company over Skype. As an author, Chris writes as PC Humphreys. Perhaps you'll all join me in starting a collection of his very exciting novels. I bought mine brand new from Amazon. They're also available from Waterstones, and you can read about them all on Chris's website at cchumphreys.com, and you can get in touch with the great man on Twitter at HumphreysCC. Greenpeace defends the natural world and promotes peace by investigating, exposing and confronting environmental abuse. And their website is greenpeace.org.uk, or as Chris suggested, you might have a local cause that you'd like to support, and all do our bit to care for Mother Nature. Now stand by for a look ahead to our next podcast. I teased on Twitter and Facebook that I was en route to interview an actor who notched up over 300 episodes of The Bill over a 10-year period. I received quite a flurry of accurate guesses and spent a very enjoyable afternoon in the fine company of the one and only Mr. Andrew McIntosh.
Next time on the Bill Podcast.
In fact, the Bill was fairly pioneering in using handheld cameras, predominantly. Even interiors were largely handheld. Sometimes they'd be on tripods, but very rarely on rails or anything like that. Generally, it was this wobble vision idea because it was sort of drama documentary. That was the flavour of it. And also, of course, the thing about it always being about the police's professional lives. It never went into their home lives, during my time anyway. And I was totally supported that ethos. I thought that absolutely made the build different, made it more interesting.